Colby Covington, one of the most polarizing fighters in MMA today, that has got title shot after title shot after title shot by being able to get underneath every champion's skin that he's faced and manipulating his words in almost every interview to simultaneously degrade his opponent and big himself up. And he has almost backed himself up every single time, but Colby has honestly drowned himself with his bad performance against Leon Edwards at UFC 296. He tried to solidify himself with a huge backing from Donald Trump, who walked out halfway through his post-fight speech. And I honestly just think people are done with Colby Covington. I think they're turning on him at this point since that Leon performance. He talked a huge game against Leon and did not deliver like he did against Kamaru Usman in their 2 wars and against Jorge Masvidal, who he dominated for 5 rounds. But he still has been making a lot of noise when it comes to the rest of the division, pretty much shit-talking everyone in the division, even after the Leon Edwards loss. Where when we look at that landscape, we clearly have the Colby Covington and Ian Gary beef. There's him wanting to fight Bilal, saying he isn't a threat and that Bilal Muhammad's a racist. And also he wants Charles Oliveira at welterweight, which Charles is definitely interested in over fighting Mateusz Gamrot, as much to Gamrot's dismay. But it would be more dangerous to fight Charles Oliveira than Ian Gary. But it does create a good storyline in Brazil's hero being Charles Oliveira, taking out the guy that called them filthy animals and Brazil a complete dump. So I just don't think he will move down to fight Oliveira. And speaking of moving down to lightweight, he won't get Dustin Poirier, as they have had a lot of beef in the past, and Dustin Poirier has come out in a press conference and said that he basically would want to kill him on the street.
I'll never fight Colby in an octagon where there's finances on the line. If I fight Colby, we're both going to jail. I'm going to jail. I'm not going to fight him in an octagon.
So that is not happening in the UFC or by any legal terms whatsoever. And Colby does contradict himself. He slates fighters for having to cut weight to get to their weight class, namely Khabib, Islam Makhachev. And even though he said he slates them, at one point he said that he did want to be a triple champion, being at 155 at lightweight, welterweight, and 185 at middleweight. So yes, he does contradict himself, but I definitely don't think any way that will happen with Dustin Poirier, as Dustin's career will most likely finish up at UFC 302, win or lose when it comes to Islam Makhachev. And then we look at Shavkat Rakhmonov. That would make complete sense for Colby Covington, especially in terms of their timelines. They both fought at UFC 296, but he's made absolutely no effort in actually calling out Shavkat, or as he says, shit rat. But that honestly would not be a good fight for Colby Covington. It's a nightmare matchup for him stylistically. I don't see any weapons that Colby Covington has that would really threat Shavkat Rakhmonov, especially at this stage in Colby Covington's career. And then when we look on the side of Shavkat Rakhmonov, we have JDM next to him. JDM, for that matter, I mean, he's someone that, honestly, I just don't see those timelines matching up and him fighting Colby Covington. I think we're going to be looking at Shavkat Rakhmonov versus JDM at UFC 305 anyway, which I hope happens. And then also we've got Colby wanting to fight Wonderboy. He called him out just after the UFC 296 event at the post-fight press conference. But I think a Stephen Wonderboy Thompson fight for Colby Covington would be a lose-lose, honestly. If he loses, his popularity plummets even further because he's losing against the nicest guy in MMA history, and the nicest guy gets to shut him up. And if he wins, it's most likely just going to be a 15-minute crotch-sniffing fight from him, as there's honestly, I just don't see any way, shape, or form that he stays on the feet against Thompson. And that goes the same against Michael Venom Page. MVP is a better matchup than Wonderboy, as he is on the rise in the UFC, and that gives Colby that opportunity to take out a hype train there. But his win method, just like against Wonderboy, is not going to get him fans. It's going to be 15 minutes of crotch sniffing. MVP did call him out, saying that he's just a fake man. He's doing everything he can to stay relevant, so there is a bit of heat there. But I think for Colby Covington's sake, it would be a smart fight IQ move and just business move in general to avoid both MVP and Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. But ultimately, Colby is a good wrestler. He's got decent hands. He's got pretty decent boxing, especially coming later into his career, which I wish he did show against Leon Edwards, which he did show against Masvidal, and he did definitely show against Kamaru Usman. And I mean, the biggest thing for Colby is his cardio. He has amazing cardio, but I do think at this stage he is out of his prime, and I will be extremely surprised if he does get another title shot in the future. Now, let's look at what he should do and what we want him to do. So firstly, when we look at what he should do, I mean, the only way that he is going to possibly even sniff at getting a title shot is if Leon loses the belt to Bilal Muhammad. And then Colby would have to either defeat Ian Gary or a welterweight Charles Oliveira. But in that time, Bilal will have to beat the winner of Shavkat Rakhmonov and Jack Della Maddalena if those two fight, which I think they most likely will. And if either Shavkat Rakhmonov or Jack Della Maddalena get the title over Bilal Muhammad, I'm saying this now, there is absolutely no chance Colby will get a title fight off of either of them. And that's because when you look at the personas of Shavkat Rakhmonov and JDM, they just don't feed into the entertainment side of the game. And Colby's verbal manipulation during interviews, his shit talking, and his overall degrading of them, like he's done with Kamaru Usman, Leon Edwards, Tyron Woodley, Damian Maia, it just won't get him the fight like it got him the fight against those fighters. It just won't get him the fight against Shavkat or JDM. That's just because both of them have very traditional fighting ideations. You can see that when it comes to them, they just don't really have much to say at press conferences. They're not entertainers. And it's pretty clear to say they both just simply want to face the best in the division and to be the best, nothing else. It's pretty clear as day that that is what those two want, and Colby is not someone to deliver that to them. The only thing that Colby delivers for them is a payday. Whereas there is a chance that Bilal would take the fight if he is the champion and stays the champion, as it's not only a money fight for Bilal. Bilal's pretty vocal. He does draw into the entertainment, definitely more than the other two. But most importantly for Bilal, it gives him the opportunity to gain fans, especially if he finishes Colby. He'll definitely win fans. If he has the title, that's what he needs, 100%. But I feel like that Colby's need scenario that we have just gone through, I just don't think it's feasible for another title shot, because honestly, I think leading up to 304, I think Leon Edwards is going to knock out Bilal Muhammad. And if Leon wins, if Leon beats Bilal, no more Colby Covington title shot ever again. It just won't happen. They will never rebook that Leon Edwards Colby Covington fight after Colby let that go. And other than that, it's just not feasible for him to get another title shot. But when we look at what we want and what would be the best path that I think for Colby Covington, is that he needs to look, especially at this stage in his career, he needs to look for those money fights with either the best storyline or the most trash talk available for him. And ultimately, whatever the fan base would want to see from him, he needs to regain those fans. And I think with what I'm about to play out, I think that this would be the best way for him to actually get all of that. I think that he has to play out the storyline of his hatred for Brazil. The Brazil comments in Sao Paulo when he beat Damian Maia is what made him. It's what made him famous. He was about to get cut, and realistically, if he didn't make that comment, he never would have changed his persona, and he wouldn't be in the UFC. He wouldn't have money, he wouldn't have the fame, he would be gone. I think he needs to carry on with that persona, as toxic as it is, and I don't really implore it. In terms of Colby's sake, I think it's the best thing for him to do. When he beat Damian Maia in front of his home crowd, he just changed his whole entire career after just going out there calling Brazil a dump and calling Brazilians animals, filthy animals. As insane as that is, it is an insane sport. And that is what Colby got. That's what got Colby his fame. And when we look at the matchups specifically, there's already so much talk circulating around Ian Gary and Colby Covington, with Gary consistently telling him to sign the contract stating he wants to shut Colby up for good as well. I mean, it's obviously a huge toxic area in terms of, building up this fight. And he's stating that he is better than him absolutely everywhere, and also with Colby's derogatory comments against Brazil, which technically include Ian Gary's wife, who is Brazilian as well, he can shut him up for that too. So there's a lot of wins for Colby if he beats Ian Gary, and there's a lot of wins for Ian Gary if he beats Colby Covington. When it comes to Colby, if he takes full advantage of it, I mean, he has taken full advantage of everything so far. He's especially the part where he's, the Ian Gary being a cuck because of, his wife writing the book on how to lure in young athletes, and he is that young athlete. And then Ian's nutritionist being her ex-partner who's like living at the house and is obviously cooking for him and everything, which for Ian Gary, it has been exacerbated by Colby Covington, MMA Guru, and a lot of others, a lot of other media members. And that is realistically, that is what is tarnishing his name in the MMA world. And if he can flip all that on his head, it's his best chance to get back on track with fans, getting onto the title, everything. I think it's the best fight that Ian Gary can get with everything that's gone on. But I do honestly think it's the best option for them both to take at this point in time. I don't think either of them have a high likelihood to embarrass the other because they don't have the KO power. Neither of them really have it. They're both, I mean, obviously Colby's wrestle heavy, and Ian Gary is technical. But yeah, the KO power just isn't there for either of them. But with all the shit talking and all the controversy, it's just a great opportunity. And Ian Gary is a better option for him than Michael Venom Page and Wonder Boy, especially in the scenario of that KO, because there is a higher likelihood of Colby just getting completely embarrassed by either one of those two with a KO compared to Ian Gary, because they do have that. They're better strikers than Ian Gary is, and they have KO power at points as well. So definitely when it comes to, that wise pickings for a matchup, because he's called pretty much all of them out, Colby should be going with Ian Gary. And yeah, if Ian Gary wins, he gets to shut out and shut up Colby Covington, possibly for good if he finishes him as well. And Colby will not fight lower in the rankings than Ian Gary. No chance in hell, and he would most likely retire. Also, when you look at Ian, he would ultimately get back at him for all the personal attacks. But if Colby Covington wins, he's shutting down a big hype train, backs up all the trash talk, and puts himself in a good position again, which will then give him more options, and who knows, by some miracle could get him another title shot, especially if he finishes Ian Gary. And also, segueing into the next part of this, is if he beats Ian Gary, he's not only beating Ian Gary, he's beating Charles Oliveira's teammate. And Charles then, I think if he beats Ian Gary, I think Charles Oliveira would be the next best step after the win for Colby. I think with Charles losing to Arman Sarukian and his only option at lightweight being Mateusz Gamrot, which it is, Mateusz Gamrot is still a good fight because of all the grappling exchanges, I'll honestly say. But I think at this stage of Charles's career, aside from beating Islam, he has nothing else to prove at lightweight. And he doesn't have a better potential storyline than Colby Covington, in that he has the opportunity to defend his country and get back at Colby for his Brazil and Brazilian fighter comments, as well as at this point avenge Gary's loss. And not to mention, this will set Charles right up for the welterweight title as well. So it gives Charles that opportunity to be a two division champion. And I mean, there's so many pros there, avenging his country, avenging his teammate, getting double champion. It would just be a fantastic opportunity for Charles Oliveira. If Charles can deal with Colby's wrestling, then he's got a huge threat with the KO power. Charles has very good Muay Thai, stiff hands. I mean, we've seen it against Gaethje. We've seen it against Chandler as well. So he does have that KO power there. And Charles obviously going off his last fight, he has something to prove, that being against Arman's wrestling game. And then for Colby, he gets a huge money fight and backs up what he said about Brazil, and then cements himself as the bad guy with the last laugh in his career, completing the storyline in his favor that made him famous in the first place in terms of degrading Brazil. And basically he gets to, if he fights Ian Gary, beats him, fights Charles Oliveira, gets a shit ton of money, and then backs up everything he says and then retires, that is the best way for him to finish his career. And speaking of Brazil and Charles having the opportunity to defend his country, if you haven't already, you might want to check out my top 5 countries the UFC need to go to, where I talk a lot about the upcoming talent from the countries that I select and why they benefit the UFC and the MMA world overall.